Well, welcome again. My name's Darryl Budge. I'm State Director for FamilyVoice here in WA, and I'm here again with Andrea Tokaji. She's been an academic lawyer for the last 8 years, teaching and educating the public about these matters. So thanks again, Andrea, for your time today. And I just wanted to speak to you about the general history of where the world governments have been going. And so we've seen an increase in powers gradually over time, and it's kind of like a boiling frog that where each of us are seeing the reach of government expanding so much. Now, you've got a background in understanding communism, where it's going, what's happening with it, because you've grown up in such a country. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, how much do you want to know? Ceausescu was a pretty evil dictator. His best friend was Saddam Hussein. So that's, birds of a feather, as they say. So we were living on food rations. He cut our electricity and water. He controlled, of course, every bit of information that came into the country. The only channel we had on television were his speeches. We worked and went to school 6 days a week. The Gestapo secret police would train children at school. If your parent says anything about Ceausescu, it is your duty as a good communist to dob them in. So parents would disappear. So we were under full control, and neighbours would dob each other in, and there was this fear-mongering. As Christians and Hungarians, we lived under persecution, and of course, you had no autonomy, you had no individual freedoms or rights.
So in terms of how that's then playing out in Australia, we see that encroachment is happening over time, and we've come to accept that. I mean, for example, doctors are not allowed to speak against any government legislation in regards to COVID or the mandates that are made by ATAGI or by. And why is it that we as Australians are accepting that level of control of supposedly independent medical advice that should be coming to us, or politicians are now kind of censored, we've been controlled by big tech and other things like that. What do you think is going on, and how can we challenge this movement?
And of course, then we've got the introduction of legislation that allows government to pry into our personal lives without question. And then, of course, ASIO Act, for example, was recently amended to include right-wing extremists, which is a very broad term for... Yeah. So, yes, absolutely. Why? Why is this happening? Why do people buy into this rhetoric? Look, at the heart of it, Marxist socialism, what is it preaching? What is it teaching people? It is saying that there is no God, government is God. It actually brings people to this place where they actually worship God, to the point where they believe in, trust in, and give all authority to government. Now, the problem, of course, with that is we live in a fallen world. Show me one person who will handle that kind of power
responsibly.
Equally, that's right.
Yeah.
Not even Jesus, wielded his power when he was here on earth. He was a man who distributed power amongst 12 mates. Do you know what I mean? Even he was someone who practiced democracy, if you will, right? He engaged in that kind of leadership sharing. We do not see in communism. So why do people buy into this? To be honest, I think Aussies are a bit naive. They've had it too good for too long. They've never lived through such trauma. So if you're naive to it, if you don't recognise it, and if the rhetoric kind of sounds good, don't worry about it, mate. We'll sort it out. We'll take care of it. You don't even have to think about it. So, it was only a few years ago where it was taboo to talk about politics and law at anyone's barbecue or social event, right? Why? That's actually a strategy to keep you ignorant and silent. Now, people only talk about politics and law. Why? Because it's affecting their everyday lives. Has that changed? No, it's always affected their everyday lives. They've just woken up to it because it's so imminently confronting. And so when we stop caring about how politics is affecting us, when we stop caring about what the law actually says and how it works, that's when it can be totally used to wield such power.
Now, there was a recent ruling in New South Wales, Kazam versus Hazard.
Yes, there was.
Yes, and can you tell us a bit about that ruling and what you think about it? I mean, some people are proposing in order to kind of respond to this threat, we need some kind of Bill of Rights or something that will protect the reach of government and to give it some kind of limit. So what do you think, as an international human rights lawyer, the best instrument for limiting the reach of this government overreach?
Yeah, sure. So I was actually part of that case as a legal researcher. I was in the thick of it. So we knew we were up against it from day one. And look, politics aside, because there was a lot of that involved, there were certain judgments made in that case that need to be challenged. So the judgment that said the discrimination that arises for the unvaccinated is consistent with the writing of the legislation, brings up a lot of human rights questions, right? What kind of discrimination? How does that play out in the workplace and, of course, in our community? And again, it is a question of proportionality, but it's also a question of inconsistency with other laws. Because we know that we don't stand for discrimination in our country. The other judgment that was made was that we don't have a Bill of Rights, therefore you have no rights. Hold on a sec, did we have rights prior to Kassam versus Hazard without having a Bill of Rights? Of course we did. So it is absolutely false to say you need a Bill of Rights. I mean, you know, Australia is how old? We haven't, 200 odd years. We haven't had a Bill of Rights. Have people had rights and exercised those rights for those 200 years? Of course they have. The United States is obviously very different given the way their politics is set up, and the Declaration of Independence very much helps them as a form of Bill of Rights, but you don't necessarily need that. Again, they're inalienable, they're codified in international law, and we have written them in our case law precedents as judgments and applied them through our executive as well. So, look, it is a falsity, but it is also a Trojan horse in the sense that the more laws you write, the more difficult it is to deal with them, the more confusing they are, and the difficult it is to understand them. One of the principles of the rule of law is law should be accessible and understandable. So if you can't access them, you can't understand them, what's the point of them? So it is absolute falsity to say that the more laws we have, the better off we are. We're seeing that play out right now. We've got legislation passed every other day without due process, without transparency. How is it helping anyone? In fact, the less laws, the better. Because what is it saying? It's saying that you are an autonomous individual with the mens rea, the thought capacity, because you're created in the image of God, to make decisions for yourself. You're actually empowered as a human being and therefore given that human dignity to do so. Isn't that better off, and wouldn't society be better off in that context? Yes. So the more laws we write, the more encroachment on government, the less rights and freedoms you actually have. That's the problem with that statement.
Right, yeah, and laws were originally designed to be as a negative protection against an actual real harm, a real measurable harm.
Absolutely.
But now where we've gone with law is we've defined what love and compassion and care is in law, but now this is how it means to care for your neighbour. This is how it means. So we've gone to not just an Old Testament definition of legal limits, we've gone to a very religious, cultish kind of, now this is what it means to care for somebody. And that's basically what the Marxism kind of message has become. That is a religious message. Right?
Yeah, and that was so problematic in Jesus' time, and he totally addressed it, which is a one group of people that he condemned. It wasn't the prostitute, it wasn't the tax collector, it wasn't the poor widow orphan, it was the Pharisee. Those who were lawyers and teachers of the law, who put the law on others and yet did not have love in their heart, right? And they're coming up to him, which law is the greatest and most important? And he summed it up. He said, love the Lord your God, all your heart, soul, mind and strength. Love others as you love yourself. And that was the point. They were so consumed with laws, they forgot their humanity. And that is the problem with our world today.
Good points. Thanks again for your time today, Andrea, and it's a really good listen. We'll go to another episode another time. See you again at another time.